Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Daf Kov Ches, Bava Metzia 108. Today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Shmira for Chayalim, Atzal for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for Am Yisrael. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yehuda. We're going to start on 108a, around 8 lines from the top. Amar Rav Yehuda, Kol Igloi Gapa. Everybody's responsible to provide money for the fences of the city to protect everybody from the intrusion from the enemies. Even if they're young orphans, although Rabbanan, but the rabbis themselves are not responsible. Why? Rabbanan don't need protection because their Torah, Rashi says, is what protects them. As it says, Peshach Bacha Tishmor Alecha, as it states in Tehillim. It says in Tehillim. I just want to cite the exact pasuk that Rashi is quoting here. Rashi cites the top pasuk not from Tehillim, from Mishlei. B'shach b'cha tishmar alecha. When you lie down, the Torah will protect you. So then the Gemara says, "V'afil mirabanan." But Lakaria Depacha, but if to dig a well or ditches for water to drink, then that fil mirabanan. And even the rabbis have to pay. Below Amran Aladu Nafki Bokuza, when do we say they have to participate? Only when people don't go out. And even those rabbanan that they pay because they need to drink water. But nevertheless, they only have to do that when the people themselves don't go out and dig and they just collect like a tax for people to pay. But if it's for everybody specifically to go out and dig, then they don't have to participate. The Rabbanan lav b'nei meipak bakuzin, because the rabbis, they don't go out and participate in this menial labor that's beneath them. Amar Rav Yehuda, Lakaria de Nahara Tatai, Lakaria de Nahara, for the digging of a river, Tatai Misayuai, that the people who are low down, meaning to dredge out the river, the people who are below, they have to help the people above. But the people above, they don't have to help once it comes down to the people below. And because the people below, they're affected by the people above, but the people above, they're not affected by the people below. The chirufa b'mai the mitra, and it's the opposite when it comes to draining the water. That if when it comes to draining, the people above are affected by the people below. It backs up, but the people below are not affected by the people above. So it's the opposite when it comes to draining the water. So we have Bryce that says something similar. If you have 5 gardens which are sustained from one spring, and the spring is ruined, then everybody has to participate with the top one. That means the bottom one participates with all of them. It also has to pay for its own. But meaning to say the bottom one has to help all of them, but none of them have to help the bottom one. And also 5 courtyards, that they all drain their water into one ditch. So then the halacha is when and the ditch is ruined, they all have to help the bottom one, but but the top one has to pay with all of them. And also at the end of the day, it's the only one that's doing it from itself. Meaning to say, because they are where the concern is about backup. So therefore, only the top one is going to be by itself, but all the other ones, if it's the bottom one, they all have to participate. Amar Shmuel, we can look at the Rashi about that. So we can understand the Metzius a little better. Rashi says, let's say you have Kagom Ba'ir, like a city, Shamayim Kashim, Baharbos, Titul Kakos Hadrachim, that the water is difficult for it because it makes a lot of mud and it ruins the roads. Osalam Charitz, B'morad, and they make them incline or ditch, to take out the water. So if the ditch will get ruined corresponding to the bottom farmer, the Koren Lahem Alyonim, the Koren Lahem, Halyonim Tzucham Wasayas Tachtonim, then the top ones need to help the bottom ones to dig. Shekolzman Shal Yardu Amayim, because as long as the because as long as the water from the bottom ones doesn't flow out, then the top ones will remain in their place. But the top ones, they don't need to help the top one to dig. Because as long as the top one hasn't drained, the top one, the people at the bottom don't mind. So therefore, it's the reverse in that case. Amar Shmuel. Now Shmuel says the halacha. Haiman de ichsik berikta de nahara chatzifa. So this person who comes along, and Rashi says that this is referring to the years of the Persians. Land was declared onerous. Whoever came and grabbed a hold of it, he was able to just grab a hold of it, and he just had to pay the tax to the land tax to the king. And if somebody came along and grabbed the land by the banks of the river, um, um, which is where the ships generally dock, and you needed that place. People, generally speaking, didn't touch that place because people needed to be able to dock their ships. And this one came to build a house there or to plow. So this person is a chutzpahdik. He's disgusting. Meaning to say everybody is messing it up for everybody else. Everybody used to leave that place ownerless so that everybody could just dock their boats there. And this guy was leaving it empty. So the person who does this, who grabs a hold of it, he's a chutzpahdik, but we don't get rid of him. But nowadays, the kakasvi, parsai, kanilacha, ad moot, savare susia, maya. But nowadays, that the Persians, write that you're going to acquire it up until you acquire in the water up until the neck of your horse. And we're also able to remove him because nowadays that the Persians write that somebody else owns it. This guy comes along and sees it, but somebody else already, technically speaking, owns it. So then you can get rid of him. So now there was two brothers and there was land in between them. And so there was a field that was standing in the two brothers, and basically he could take it and then pay the tax. So this person comes along and seizes it in between the two brothers or in between the two partners. He's arrogant, he's chutzpahdik, but he has a technical right to be there, so you can't get rid of him. Rav Nachman Amar Nami Misalkinan, we can even get rid of him. We're even allowed, Rav Nachman says, we're even allowed to get rid of him. That's the teaching of Rav Nachman, because the partners can claim that we had the first right to get it. But if the owner of the lands that's next to it, they don't claim, their only claim is bar mitzvah, meaning to say that they're not brothers or partners, but they just happen to have land that's near it. Meaning to say if they're two partners or if they're brothers, then they could say you don't have a right to take it because this is the land in between ours. But if it's just a question of the fact that this guy was a neighbor and he said I wanted it first, then we can't remove them from the land because the neighbor doesn't have the right to kick them out. But the people from Nardai said, no. I feel Mishum Dina the Bar Mitzvah. The fact that you're a neighbor there, that means you have the first right to the land. And so Mitzalkinale, we are allowed to get rid of this person from the property. Why? Mishum Shenemar, because it states, Vasisa Yashar Atov Beinei Hashem. Because we say that the law is that you have to do what's right in the eyes of God. And so therefore, this person can go ahead and find real estate in another place. So it's not going to hurt him to not take it. So therefore, you should have left it for the neighbor. And so therefore, we would kick him out. So that's what the Nardai said. So now the Gemara is going to give us several halachos about the law of the bar metzia, or the law of the dina de bar metzia. So the Gemara says, let's say the purchaser comes and he makes a law with the neighbor. And makes a deal of Amrei Ezel Isbin. He says, should I go and purchase this land that's on the border next to you? The guy who's a neighbor says, go ahead and buy it. I don't mind. Does he have to make a kinyan? Does he have to have a formal agreement with this neighbor that he's going to buy or not? Ravina says he doesn't need to make a formal kinyan. Nardai say no, you need to make a formal kinyan, because if you don't do that, then the neighbor could come along and say, I was just joking, and I just really want to know how much it was worth. And so therefore, you really need to make a formal transaction to make sure that the neighbor can't change his mind. You need to, the law is you need to make a formal transaction. So Gemara says, so now that we said that you need to make a formal transaction, let's say the purchaser didn't go ahead and make this acquisition, or he just received his oral permission, but he didn't actually get the technical permission. So then he's going to be considered like the agent of the neighbor. And so therefore, Yaakov Vizol, if the land went up or went down, Bereshuse, we're going to assume that it's in the law, in the domain of the neighbor that went up or down. And so therefore, and so then he's basically just an agent of the he's just an agent of the neighbor at that point. And so therefore, he'd have to basically the neighbor is the one who has the real money at that point. So the Gemara says, Zabin b'meya v'shavin masan. So the Gemara is going to bring another halach with respect to this. Let's say the purchaser bought the land for $100, but now it's worth $2. Chazina, we look at the matter. If the seller would sell it for this price for everybody, meaning to say that he needed money, so then the neighbor is allowed to give the $100 to the purchaser because he could have bought it for that price, and then you kick him off the land. Below, but if he was not, but if the owner would not have sold it to somebody else for that price, he just gave this person who bought it a special deal, then the neighbor would have to pay him $200. But let's say the neighbor, the owner of the land, sold it to the person for 200, it's really worth 100. So we have to say, according to the previous law, so our assumption may be that the neighbor could say to the guy who bought it, listen, I only wanted you to buy it to help me, not to hurt me. I don't want to overpay by double. But the Gemara says, no, we can't say that because we have a principle. There's such thing as overcharging as relates to real estate. And so therefore, that's the price he paid for it. He can remove him for that price. Let's say he sold to the purchaser a little bit of land in the middle of the field of the seller, and then afterwards he sold him the additional land on that same side. Chazinan, easy bursi. So then we have to look if this little bit of land that he first sold him was considered a better land or a worse land, and if it's different than the land that he sold him later on, zachina zibeh. So now the purchaser is able to acquire the land, and we're not going to say this law of Bar Metzia because he himself is a neighbor because he already bought this land. So if it's better or worse land, then we're going to say that it's going to be not the law of the Bar Metzia. But if it's the exact same land, then it's clear on top of Kufchas Amabeis, the Arumi Kamarim. They're just trying to get around the law of Bar Metzia, and it's not gonna hold. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is now going to bring a total of, let's see, 8 cases where we're going to say that the law of Bar Metzia does not apply. 8 cases where the law of Bar Metzia does not apply. So what are these 8 cases? So let's say a person gave the land to matana. Let's say he wants to give it to his friend as a gift. Then the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply, that the neighbor can remove him from the land because this Amar Meimer says, even though the law of the Bar Metzia doesn't apply to a gift, nevertheless, the kasav way, achrayos, if let's say the one who's giving this gift writes to the person that he's guaranteeing it, that if people come and take the land, then we're going to say isba mishum din de Bar Metzia. Then we're going to say law Bar Metzia does apply because generally speaking, the people who give gifts don't guarantee it, and so therefore it's clear it's a sale. And so we're not going to let him get away with it. Let's see, so all your possessions, including this land to one person, then we're going to say the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply. Because clearly there the person is hard pressed for money. And so therefore, that's the reason why I have to sell everything. And so the seller does not say that he should have sold it to a person who is a neighbor. Number 3, let's say he goes back and sells it to the original owner. Then we don't say the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply because there's no greater sita ashar be'atov than to return it to the original owner. Number 4, Zabim me'ov v'kochavim v'zabim lo v'kochavim la'is v'mishum de Bar Metzia. Let's say you purchased the land from idolaters. V'zabin, or if you sold the land to idolaters, then we're not going to say that the law of Bar Metzia applies. Why? If you purchased it from idolaters, he says, I did a good thing. I chased away a lion from your border. You didn't want to have a share a boundary with idolaters. Of course, it's going to be a problem. And also, if you sold it to idolaters, and so therefore, that it doesn't apply because the idolater does not command to do what's good and righteous in the eyes of God. And so therefore the neighbor can kick him off. But if he sold it to idolaters, we're for sure going to excommunicate him. Unless the person who sold it accepts upon himself that he's going to be responsible for any accident that would occur. Also, number 5th one, mashkanta. Let's say this field was a pledge to somebody else in exchange for a loan, and in the end, he sold it to the lender. Then the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply because he's really the greatest neighbor of all because he's the lender. What does the word mashkanta mean? That he is dwelling with the lender of that time. Now, why do we need to know what the word mashkanta comes from? The origin of the etymology. Adina de Bar Metzia for the law of Bar Metzia. Number 6, limkor berachok v'ligol bekarov. Let's say he wants to. Let's say the seller wants to sell this field that's actually far away from where he lived, and he wants to, in its place, redeem a field that's right next to his place, or Baral will go biyafa, or he wants to sell a bad field and redeem a good field. Then the neighbors can't complain anything because if he won't be able to sell now, there's a concern that he'll lose this opportunity. So too with Chargo, let's he needs to pay off the tax. This is the 7th case. If he won't be able to sell it right away and pay off the tax, then he's going to be in a lot of trouble. Or when he needs to get food or for a grave. Then we see the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply. The Amrin Ardai, as Ardai said, for these really extreme circumstances of a Nardai of tax, food, and burial, you can sell even with making any proclamation because those are extreme cases. Let's say you need to sell it to get married or for orphans, or let's say you have a partner in this field, then we're going to say the laws of Bar Metzia don't apply because that the neighbors can push him off because a woman or an orphan, they don't typically check after other lands to sell them. They typically just sell them right away. And so therefore we don't apply this principle. And also a partner, it's like he was already dwelling in it. And so therefore the law of Bar Metzia doesn't apply. Let's say the owner of the field who wants to sell it, and he has 2 neighbors who could acquire it. The neighbors are either of the city, meaning to say, or the neighbors of the field. Let's say there are two types of neighbors that want to purchase it. One are the neighbors of the field. They live in like a house right next door, and the other people have a field next door to it. Then the people who have the house come first. Let's say there's a neighbor, and there's a Torah scholar who's not a neighbor. Then the Torah scholar comes first. The relative and a Torah scholar comes first. So the Gemara asks the question. Let's say Shachem Vikarov. Let's say he has a neighbor and he has a relative who's not a neighbor. Who comes first? Tashma, the Gemara said, let's try and answer this from the Brisa. Tov Shachem Karov me'ach achok. It's better to have a good neighbor than a faraway brother. Meaning to say, sell it to your neighbor first. You're in you sell it to your neighbor who's closer. Hani zuzi tavi. So the Gemara says the money that the purchaser gave, v'hani zuzi tekuli. Right. So one person, the purchaser gave good money, and better than the bar mitzvah who's giving bad money. If somebody's paying better money for it, then the law of bar mitzvah doesn't apply. So too, the Gemara says, let's say hani tzayare v'hani share. So the money that the neighbor sends are put up in they're in a bag, and the sellers are afraid to untie it to check how much it is because maybe the neighbor's going to make some accusations, whereas the money the other person sends is clear and free. So he says, so there's an advantage to getting the loose money. Third case, let's say a person, Amar, let's say the neighbor says to the seller, don't worry, I'll go collect the money. The seller is not obligated to wait with him. Number four, let's say Amar Ezel Isi Zuzi Ikavri to Amidhu, but if when somebody else brings the money, the neighbor says, let me go and get the money. We see Igavra de Amidhu, if he is a person that we can trust, Azul Maisi Zuze, not Trinaway. If he's the person we can trust, we let him bring the money. Otherwise we don't. Number five, Ar Dechad Ubate Dechad. Let's say it is if the land belonged to one person and the house that was on it belonged to somebody else. Mari Aram Akev Mari Baita. The owner of the land can prevent the owner of the house to sell it specifically to him and not to somebody else. But Mari Baita Loma Akev Mari Aram. But the person who owns the house can't force the seller to sell it to him. Our Dechad V'Dikle Dechad. Let's say one person owns the land, the other person owns the tree on it. Mari Dari Matzi Ma'akev Mari Dikle. The one who owns the land can prevent the owner of the palm tree to force him to sell it only to him. But the one who owns the palm tree can't force the landowner to sell it to him. That one person wants to purchase the land to build houses, and the neighbor wants to purchase it to plant. Yishuv adif. The planting of the land is better than building houses. And the law of bar mitzvah doesn't apply. Number 8, hafsik mishinasa or rikhba de dikla. Let's say there is a big rock or the roots of the trees that are separating between the fields. Chazina im yachol achnes ba afilu talamech. We see if you could take a plow in between. If so, isba mishum dina de bar mitzvah. If you could basically use the field on the plow, then the law of bar mitzvah applies. Below, otherwise, isba mishum dina de bar mitzvah. Otherwise, the law of bar mitzvah doesn't apply. So the Gemara says, Hani Arba B'nei Matzrine. So the Gemara is going to end with this case. These 4 neighbors who are the neighbors to this field, to call them Chamina of Zabin. Now one of them jumped ahead and he bought the field. Zabine, his purchase is valid. Be cool also Bahadi Adadi, but if all of them come together to purchase the field, so then we're going to say he sold it to all of them together, and we divide it in like a diagonal. And so Rashi given as a diagram, everybody takes the portion of the triangle that's closest to his field. Okay, so this is the daf yomi for Shabbos Kodesh, and a big shkoyach everybody was able to study.
Thank you.